Okay, well, David, it's really nice to see you again today. Since we met last, you've gained fame by having a letter published in the national newspapers. Is it the Times?
Sunday Times.
The Sunday Times. And I gather there's been quite a response from your letter.
Yes.
So just refresh my memory. What was the letter all about?
At the moment, they're reshaping the defence forces in this country with the prospect of increasingly limited funds. And it was a suggestion how they could be reshaped. That the defence forces historically were based upon three separate entities which had grown up over the centuries and were self-sufficient, autonomous organisations, and yet we expected them to cooperate to the highest degree. And if you were designing a defence system from new on a blank sheet of paper, you would never have that. You would have one which was much more a partnership, working together with common leadership, good communication system, some sense of leadership, authority, delegation, identification of particular roles, trusting each other, working together to a common perspective. And that is a very difficult thing to achieve if there is three separate organisations. And what I was suggesting was a unified organisation, one which shared a common entry, common training, common work together, so that they had shared values, shared ways of knowing things, that they became a single unified force. This has been tried by the Canadians, and there was a great deal of conflict, aggression, some people being sacked from the forces. But they have moved, the Canadians have moved a good way together and still maintain a single form of entry and then specialised training after that.
Something has happened recently which is a minor version of this, is with our emergency services. It's just occurred to me that there was all this debate about whether the ambulance services could link with the fire service and so on.
Yes.
And I suspect that's a kind of minor run of what's going to happen if we start addressing this major issue.
Exactly. It's that we're now identifying that there's an overarching purpose for many of these organisations, like education and social welfare. So that do you need... It's a problem of organisational design, isn't it, Tudor? We have the sort of eternal problems of organisation, specialisation against generality. But you also have the problem that how do you overcome the first steps, that we have to decide that here we are at the moment with three separate organisations with a great deal of resistance to change. How do you overcome that? What can we do? And that is the problem for you creative types, to identify where the next steps would be. Well, maybe a number of steps. It's an experimental thing. Try different things.
Well,
the Marines is one illustration.
I'm sure that if you go back to one of the very simple methods of change that we teach is Beckard's change equation. Now, I think what you've got is the first step of Beckard's imperative for change, which is a clear vision about where you think you want to go.
Yep.
And I think you've also got the second of his three steps, which is clear dissatisfaction with what we've got at the moment.
And necessity. It's not only dissatisfaction, it's the fact that the forces, as with all public sector, have to cut 20% of their costs in the next.
Now, the next step is to find out what would be, to my mind, it would be what would be a first step, and it's the old domino idea, really, that no one's going to disagree with. And I think that's what makes people fearful of change, because they can see that it's a first step. And I think the first step might indeed be some kind of merger within the three forces, rather than some kind of dictator saying we're just going to pull the whole three together.
Which is what they attempted in Canada and came up against.
Yeah, they need this first step. So you're going to get, and interestingly, with the way that the political scene is playing out at the moment, I think we're likely to get more consensus after the next election. Because who knows, it might even be a hung parliament, so many more democratic processes might come into play. I don't know, or it may be a complete kind of morass where nothing happens. We'll have to see.
I think the political system might well provide some sort of clearer vision after the election, but you still stand up against the professional resistance. The three forces have been embedded there. Even the Air Force is 100 years old, so.
Amazing, isn't it? And you're going to get the question, who's going to be in charge of this thing? It's a
Absolutely.
fascinating...
But that should evolve over time from somebody who's trained in the three areas, so they have experience of all three areas. Like any organisation, if you join the NHS, you get trained in different parts of the organisation to start off with, so you have some perspective of what's happening in general practice, in the acute sector, in the community. And somebody who's had a good training in the NHS has that wider perspective, so that when they become chief executive of the health service, they have some understanding of each one of the bits.
And would you think they could go and run the armed forces with that training?
I think people came from the armed forces to attempt to run the NHS and came up against a great deal of problems. They don't understand the culture of the NHS, and I fancy the people who needed to run a unified defence force would need to understand the culture. But it'll be a generation before you get a unified development. But that should be the vision. That's the important thing. You start on this path and you work one step at a time. It's Mel's one that you have to start by taking one step.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Maybe the church. Religions might be more challenging because beliefs are even stronger in religion than they are.
I think you're talking about sort of ranges of infinity now.
Absolutely. You're heading out to the limits.
And the mathematicians may say
but
that
it is a tremendous challenge that any other organisation, I think, would be easier than the military to change. But then, students should be exposed to such extremes.
Oh, I think so. And I think they should have the courage to think about it without having the foolishness to imagine they can come up with a simple answer.
Absolutely, yes. Yes.
Which goes back to all our stuff about dilemmas of leadership.
Yes, absolutely.